Iraq, Lebanon alarmed at spreading Syrian war. I've covered before about how you have Lebanon supposedly by outside interests, mostly Israel, trying to drag Lebanon into the war and split the country. Also, Iraq's been kind of sitting on the sidelines, can't really do much, not really for what the outside powers are doing, creating instability. You know, where you have Turkey completely, like in Jordan, completely all for the Western agenda of regime change inside Syria, whereas Iraq, they're doing some things that are helping the Assad regime, but very little. You know, it says here, neighboring Iraq warned that Syria's civil war is tearing the Middle East apart, and Lebanon's president urges country and their Hezbollah movement on Thursday to pull its fighters out of the conflict. That's right. Lebanese president urges Hezbollah to leave Syria in an interview. He says he is going into Golan Heights because it exposes Lebanon to the Israeli enemy. If they take part in a battle for Aleppo and more Hezbollah fighters are killed, it will lead to more tension, he said. Lebanese army chief says army to strike with iron fist. He stressed on Friday that the military will not tolerate any security violations and will confront any destabilization attempts against the country. Said the army will fully carry out its duties to take the country to safety. So it's kind of a weird way of wording it, but CIA training Syria rebels says a report. I already covered this in the last report. LA Times says secret work started last year. So it says here that they've actually been working with special forces as well, but the CIA. So they're arming them and they're also training them, which is interesting. You have this individual, American, who allegedly fought with Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, indicted. This Eric Kruven, whatever, ex-U.S. soldier, fought alongside Al-Qaeda. Was he training and arming the rebels or the terrorists? His father basically makes the claim that he was working for the CIA. So this is my website, ggnonline.com, and there's a poll up there. The poll is closed, but the results were, what is your take on the recent NSA scandal? Not much. Another control leaked to engineer consent so far, or actually in total 85% said that they believe that it was to engineer consent, followed by 14% saying this is progress, a grassroots campaign against surveillance state. And just my viewers, I just want to put this out there that I don't think that I know everything. I don't even think I'm close to knowing everything. And I don't have 15 minutes to explain every single article and my ideas on it. So I'm trying to, plow through 100, sometimes 120 articles in 45 minutes, so I don't have time to go in there and this and this and that. So, the links are posted. Go in there and check it out. And, I'm learning. All the time I'm learning. My views are always changing, evolving as I'm coming across more information. So, speaking of grassroots, Russia, I talked about it being basically controlled by the same powers that control the United States, and then other people say, well, they're mostly the fraudulent thieves that are in there, not so much politics and government and economy, and they're probably right. Like I said, I don't know everything about Russia, but for me personally, I really doubt that there's anything that's grassroots in this engineered society. I highly doubt it, that most things that you actually see taking place, such as a big, huge country like Russia, is actually going to be, just grassroots people. And that, them pushing them into the Soviet Union, run by Jews, and the United States, Western democracy set up by the, quote, forefathers, that all of this was grassroots. I don't believe any of it. I think we're just being pushed until eventually we are led to the, quote, whatever end times, where they present their Luciferian Antichrist figure. I'm not talking in a religious sense, I'm talking about shredding everybody's beliefs, turning them on their heads, and when they're still kind of all discombobulated and confused, they present this hero, this godly figure who happens to be their kind of entity, tricking them. I think that's the end game. I think that's what the big picture is. So, rebel group won't fight Israel if it enters Syria, so we will leave the fighting to Hezbollah and Assad's men, says a spokesman. So the rebel group, or terrorists on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights, stated Thursday that it would not fight Israel if Israel sends forces into Syria. Well, of course not, because they're being medevaced, right? They're being helped by Israel. Now the Philippines are warning that it may pull peacekeepers out of Golan. Remember, these same rebels have been kidnapping these UN peacekeepers. No one said a damn thing about it, or was crying out that something must be done. Austria just pulled out their UN peacekeepers as well. That, of course, left a vacuum for Russia. Moscow sets up Russian Golan brigade, warns Israel Sunnis plus Al-Qaeda are bigger threat than Assad. So they wanted to set up and replace the Austrians' UN peacekeepers with these Russian brigade. Of course, they said that they could not do that. Spetsnaz, Russian Spetsnaz 2, Special Operations Forces set for combat. The Russian armed forces are ready to roll out military units trained to perform combat missions both in Russia and abroad. I've actually trained here in the United States. I believe it was in Colorado, joint forces with the United States. 600 Russians, Europeans fight alongside militants in Syria, says Putin. We've already covered this, but at least 600 people originating from Russia and Europe are fighting on the side of the Syrian opposition, says Putin. Kind of a no-brainer, but he says here that the West sending weapons to the anti-Assad groups, saying that the arms may end up in the hands of the terrorists. If the U.S. recognizes one of the Syrian opposition organizations, al-Nusra, as terrorists, how can one deliver arms to those opposition members? Where will those weapons end up, and what role will they play? MOSSAD recruiting Algerian youth to fight Syrians. Israeli spy agency MOSSAD is recruiting Algerian young men to send them to Syria to help fight or help the other foreign-backed terrorists in the fight against the Syrian people and the government, says an Algerian newspaper. Leading Jewish supremacist confirms that Zionist interests served by chaos in Syria. So it's said here that they're closely allied with the Israeli government, or this individual who's saying this has confirmed that instability in Syria best serves the Zionist interest. So it says here that he wrote an op-ed piece in Israeli news service Ynet. Goes on, he says that Israel and the U.S.'s best strategy should be to help maintain the status quo where neither Assad nor the rebels are strong enough to defeat the other militarily. He goes in and talks about how Qasir, basically near Lebanon, has been closed down by the Assad government, and they had lots of losses on the side of the terrorists. He said that this has served as a rebel supply corridor from Lebanon as far as the weapons, so that's why it's a big game changer. And of course, Turkey was also funneling them in too, but of course they have their instability, which is why maybe they're coming, ramping up the exercises in Jordan, bringing Jordan back in the picture. Says if Assad wins, the U.S. will lose the remainder of its credibility and deterrence power in the Middle East. Iran will become stronger than ever. A weakened Assad will owe everything to Iran and become its puppet. As if there's some kind of difference between Israeli and American influence in a Zionist-occupied government of the United States. It says an Assad win over the terrorists will unravel decades of American influence in the Middle East and endanger Israel in the process. They're killing each other. Western weapons for Syrian rebels will intensify war. The U.S. decision to arm the terrorists fighting the government troops has sparked feuds among the various rebel factions dominated by radical Islamist fighters. This is what RT contributor Ashvin Ratansi warns against the move. It says here, this is as internal schisms among the rebels deepen. So this is a long line with creating destabilization and sectarian war. New weapons supplied to militants in Syria. Says we've received quantities of new types of weapons, including some that we asked for and that we believe will change the course of the battle on the ground, so game-changing weapons. The Israeli president and British officials have voiced support for arming the militants. We already covered this. American who allegedly fought with Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria indicted. New slaughter and execution crimes in Syria is the result of these, we were just talking about them, these Takfiri Fatwas. So a video showing terrorists from the so-called legitimate body of the Islamic State in Iraq and Lebanon brutally slaughtered a young Syrian boy and executing 2 women in the Aleppo countryside. The Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group had previously committed similar murder shows in front of citizens who have been demanding it to end its crimes and leave their city. UNESCO puts Syrian historical sites on danger lists. UN Cultural Agency says 6 historical sites in Syria are in imminent danger because of the country's civil war and urging international support to protect them. U.S. scraping billions of dollars worth of military equipment in Afghanistan. So that's right. Facing a tight withdrawal deadline. Yeah, they were talking about deadlines, like 4 or 6 years ago. So, and tough terrain. The U.S. military has destroyed more than 170 million pounds worth of vehicles and other equipment as it rushes to wind down its role in Afghanistan war by the end of 2014. So, the government fulfills on its agreements and its promises, right? So Cryptagon says U.S. government borrowed money of China or from China and did what with it? Well, the cost to U.S. of Iraq and Afghan wars could hit $6 trillion. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan could reach as high as $6 trillion or $75,000 for every American household. A new study from Harvard has said. I already covered this article, but I'm throwing it in there to try to tie it in to show you that this is how we get pushed from here and there as far as by the elites trying to create this global system. You know, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, you know, the Chinese government's completely sovereign, doesn't have any Zionists in there, you know, good for them, much like Russia. But I think it's just like everything else. You know, you bring one side down, you bring the other up. You know, this is a completely artificially lifted up country. Promised spoils of U.S. war in Iraq, it's oil. So go to China. The U.S. fought the war in Iraq, but China got its spoils, oil that is. China is funding Bush's Iraq war, that's right. So, you know, all this money, you know, $75,000 for every household is going to pay so China can basically win, right? So they can actually be the benefiters. And they don't just have to pay for all the disability payments to the veterans who went over and fought or died for that, but then they have to pay the interest, the amount that was borrowed back. EU and US sanctions driving Iran into China's hands. At least that's what they say. Another way to word this headline is basically China is profiting and is benefiting from these sanctions. They keep saying they're against the sanctions against Iran, but they're actually benefiting from them. Iran crude oil exports to China increased 50% in May. 50% increase in crude oil exports to China from Iran. U.S. says Iran elections prove sanctions are working. So it goes on and says U.S. officials are trying to spin Iran's elections and the victory of President-elect Rouhani as proof of their ongoing sanctions are working and that the economic damage done scared Iranian voters into electing the diplomacy-minded cleric. Then, of course, there's Israel, which has reacted angrily to the elections, expressing fear that a pro-diplomacy Iran might lead to actual diplomacy and get in the way of their goals of a war. This is an article from FT. This is actually just the headline. I can't get access to it, but sanctions benefit Iran's rich and powerful. So just let that sink in, I guess. Russia and China to sign $270 billion oil contract. 365 million tons over 25 years. They already supply China with 15 million tons. U.S. Afghanistan auditor tells of free-for-all as subcontractors demand money they're owed. U.S. auditing found that these contractors on U.S.-funded projects in the country frequently aren't paid. It resulted in a bunch of problems that included delayed and unfinished jobs, death threats to company workers, and allegations of corruption. Well, the whole thing, that's what it's all about, fraud. And you flip the bill, whatever, the taxpayers. Corporatizing national security, what it means. The article's referring to the NSA and the whole Snowden story. But I'm going to move into more of the Army or defense contractors. Russia and elastic power. Will the burgeoning private security industry lead to private military companies too? So it says here they just relaxed restrictions on security forces of gas giant Gazprom and oil pipeline Transneft to be lifted, allowing them increased access to lethal weapons and rules of engagement for their use. It says here it represents a rolling back of the trend during the early Putin years when the private security sector, which had become pretty much out of control in the 90s, was reined in dramatically. So that's what this is about. Remember, we just covered this. Russia's corporate armies may be on the way back. Warning of private army running Britain after government increases spending on security firm G4S by 65 million pounds. So they saw an income from U.S. taxpayer rise by 20% last year. It says here they earned $394 million. One politician warns of over-reliance on private security contractors. So this is the future, I think, guys, is that, you know, we talk about scaling back of the military. You know, I keep seeing, just in the story yesterday, I saw two articles. I was flanked by two articles. One from Popular Mechanics. I could not find the cover for it, but it was talking about special operations, the future of warfare, and that was the same thing, the Time magazine on the other side. You know, the future of warfare, special forces. So they scale down the army. They create and rely on their own private mercenary armies. These special forces are pretty much the same thing. They're their own little private the elites' private special forces. They're going to, and these tactical teams in the cities are going to help lift these bankers and elites off the top of skyscrapers when the people start rioting. This is why Bill Gates is buying into his world's largest security company, G4S. Thank you.